Welcome back to Two Hearts, where stories are weaved to explore the beauty of diverse cultures and the depths of human connection. Balancing a public persona against the desire for privacy is no small feat, especially when a billionaire who doesn't understand the meaning of the word no and a successful business consultant fall for each other hard and fast on an overnight flight. Although they have mutual attraction and career synergy on their side, can the burgeoning couple also develop emotional bonds, encourage vulnerability, and prioritize intimacy in order for their relationship to endure? Follow Jacob and Paige as they bypass the firewall of status quo to live in love in a way that will enrich their lives forever. Please enjoy Perfect Strangers. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so that more members of our community continue to find content like this.
The cabin of the Boeing 787 bustled with activity as passengers settled into their rows. One of the first to board, Paige had quickly found her seat that was more of a luxurious stall, stowed her extra items, then hunkered down for what would be the long transatlantic flight. A few moments later, after she'd gotten herself entrenched in a harried email text exchange with her assistant about some last-minute changes to her itinerary, she was interrupted by a terse inquiry. "Excuse me, is this seat 2A?" A deep voice with a clipped tone asked. Not bothering to speak, just simply pointing to the seat indicator overhead, Paige neither looked up nor halted her text communication over the mobile device. After a considerable beat of silence, the voice began again. "What I mean to say is, I think you're sitting in my seat." At that, Paige did look up and immediately caught the exasperated expression that crossed the face of an otherwise handsome man. Swiping through her phone to the digital wallet where her ticket was stored, Paige recognized her error and pulled a face in part annoyance, part embarrassment. She was supposed to be sitting in seat 2B. "My apologies," she mumbled as she stood from the leather seat she'd just warmed up to allow the man entrance into their shared enclosure. Once he too underwent the obligatory ritual of situating himself into the space, the two eventually fell into communal silence. The plane ascended into the clear afternoon sky, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of those aboard. Among them was Paige Richardson, a successful digital media consultant known for her keen eye, reflective insights, and innovative strategies. She was on her way to a crucial meeting and then to a tech conference in London, her mind buzzing with ideas and potential pitches. She'd been prepping for weeks for this trip, and now that it was here, she was ready to show her prospective clients the value in a partnership with her. Success, however, hadn't always been sunny for Paige. Just 2 years before, she had experienced personal sabotage and a betrayal so invasive and disturbing, it had cost her nearly everything. In clawing her way back from the literal abyss, she remained more determined than ever to protect her name, her business, and her brand. Now en route to a more secure future, she was finally able to exhale, but couldn't help feeling a sense of anticipation, a sensation that something significant was on the horizon. Jacob McAdams, the tech CEO seated next to her, also appeared to appreciate the aerial reprieve, if his relaxed shoulders and occasional glances out the large window were any indication. Although the indomitable CEO had been, and still was, very busy securing the necessary investors for the next phase of his business's intelligence launch, his company was on the brink of revolutionizing the language and conversational search technology space, and he was thrilled at the possibilities. As such, his mind was rightfully occupied with the weight of the upcoming meetings and the presentation that would spell the future for his company. But despite all that, his curiosity had been working overtime. After the annoying exchange with the discourteous woman he'd called out for occupying his seat, he'd expected to remain irritated with her. People didn't usually cross him and then turn around and dismiss him without hefty consequences. But instead of simmering anger, he found himself peeking at the beautiful menace when she wasn't looking. Seeming to sense his warring emotions, once Jacob had glanced up from his laptop for the 5th time in as many minutes, her eyes finally locked with his. The moment was brief, but it sparked a startling awareness in him. As the plane soared through the clouds, the flight attendant offered the business cabin passengers their perfunctory refreshments of delectable food and premium drinks. Paige chose the pescatarian option with a complimenting glass of wine, while Jacob opted for the lamb protein and a glass of champagne. Their hands brushed as the attendant passed them their meals and drinks, a moment that sent a high-voltage current through them both. Exchanging another glance, a silent acknowledgement was made of the chemistry that had suddenly ignited and was now slow burning between them. Jacob. Done with his meal, the now satiated man introduced himself, extending a hand. "Paige," she replied, her voice soft yet confident and her proffered hand fitting perfectly into his. As the pair established their baseline, the conversation between them flowed effortlessly. Surprisingly foregoing the guardedness reserved for strangers, they easily opened up to one another about their careers, their passions, and even their dreams.
"I'm a digital media consultant by vocation, but my desire has always been to help eliminate disparities in the use of digital technologies, especially where lack of access to the internet and other digital tools inhibit pathways to success," she explained. "Ah, bridging the digital divide," he nodded in understanding. "That and providing client insights on how to establish multi-layer control and encryption strategies to secure PII," she continued. "PII," he repeated. "Personally identifiable in..." "Yes, I am aware of what PII is. I'm just intrigued about how that plays into your career path," he wondered, his blue-gray eyes intense. I just think that it's a rapidly growing market that should require a greater focus," she explained, before pivoting back to him. "And what about you?" "Tech executive at Novosphere. We're a glorified search engine," he explained self-deprecatingly. "Yes, I'm familiar, but please don't sell yourself short. The conversational data segment query tech sector is slated to be big business for a very long time," she noted. "You're right," he stated with an approving nod, impressed with her knowledge of his company's focus. Unsurprisingly, with those revelations, they each discovered a shared love for technology in the other and its potential to transform lives around the world. "So, Paige, what brings you to London?" Jacob asked, slightly turning in his seat to give her his full attention. "Business and business," she joked, and he laughed. "Actually, a part of my trip is for a consultancy proposal, and the balance is to attend this year's CyberLife conference." "Same here," he raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Well, not the proposal part. I'm a guest panelist at CyberLife," he clarified. It was her turn to raise a brow. "Really? What session?" "Natural language understanding for AI digital tools. Same conference circuit, different angle," he pointed out. "Maybe we could compare notes sometime." "Yeah, maybe," she smiled. With much more in common than either of them could have imagined, the hours seemed to fly by. Aside from his arresting good looks, Paige had been captivated by Jacob's wit, business acumen, and intellect. At his request, she'd been prepared to offer some constructive feedback on his panel talking points when the captain's voice came over the intercom to instruct the passengers of the descent protocols. Before they knew it, the plane was preparing for landing, and their isolated bubble had effectively burst. As they disembarked, Jacob turned to Paige, his eyes reflecting the intensity of their connection. "This may seem a bit forward, but I don't want this to end here," he said, his voice low and earnest. Paige felt a flutter in her chest. "I'm a little embarrassed to admit it, having just met you and all, but neither do I," she confessed, her heart racing. Jacob grabbed his wallet from his pocket and pulled out a business card. "Let's not lose touch then," he said, placing the weighty stock into her hand, his fingers intentionally brushing against hers. Paige smiled, her eyes meeting him. "I won't," she promised softly. There was no begging, insisting, or negotiating.
just an offer to pick up where they left off, if she were willing. As they entered the terminal, they both lingered as if wanting to say more, before the hustle and bustle of travelers around them jostled them apart. Bumping her hand, a frantically running man knocked the business card from her loose grip. Bending to retrieve it amongst the shuffling feet and swiveling luggage was futile on Paige's part. And when she righted herself with nothing to show for her efforts, Jacob was no longer anywhere to be found. Jacob had never been so impacted by a first impression than he'd been at having made Paige's acquaintance. Her dark skin, intense eyes, and stunning features were an eye-catching draw that clearly went without saying. But her passion and intelligence were what captivated him in a way that was both refreshing and alarming. He hadn't wanted to push, but he thought their connection over the long flight might have led to more than her polite acceptance of his business card. Still, with his resources and social standing, he'd always been wary of women on the pursuit, so he was glad for her reticence, even if it bruised his ego a little. Heading their separate ways with nothing but a first name between them, each felt a profound sense of loss, as if a piece of themselves had been left behind. The final glance they'd exchanged in the airport had been unsettling, but also like a guarantee, a silent vow to find their way back to each other. "Mr. McAdams, you're up," the moderator whispered, snapping Jacob out of his reverie. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage, his mind still on Paige. Jacob's eyes scanned the audience, searching for the familiar face that had haunted his thoughts since their flight. As things got underway, the exchanges from the panel discussion members flowed organically. Ultimately, the session had gone smoothly, but his thoughts had been elsewhere, making it impossible for him to focus. As the days passed and the conference came to an end, Jacob's hope of seeing Paige again dwindled. He had been certain that their connection was real, and the lack of any communication from her left him with a lingering sense of disappointment. "I thought we had something special," he mused, staring at his phone, willing it to ring or buzz with a message from her. Meanwhile, Paige was engrossed in intense negotiations for her proposal meeting, which had unexpectedly stretched from a day to a week. Paige's client was demanding, and the negotiations were grueling.
"I want to see every detail of your proposal," he said, his eyes narrowing as he reviewed the documents. "This is a significant investment, and I need to be sure it's worth it." Paige, though exhausted, stood her ground, presenting her case with unwavering confidence. "You won't be disappointed," she assured him. Hunkering down in their boardroom, Paige's eyes locked onto the contract, her fingers drumming on the table as she waited for the client's response. The room was tense, but Paige's persistence paid off. In the end, she'd secured the contract, a significant win for her career. Unfortunately, it had meant that she had to miss the conference. The disappointment of not attending was palpable, and she found herself thinking of Jacob more often than she cared to admit. "I can't believe I missed it," she muttered to herself, staring at her laptop, which displayed the conference schedule. She had been looking forward to the event, not just for the networking opportunities, but also for the chance to see Jacob again. But business came first, and she had made the right choice. Well, that is what she told herself as she packed up her belongings and headed from the conference room to her awaiting ride. Her eyes welling up with unexpected tears of frustration, she dropped her head back on the seat rest as her driver took her back to her hotel. Paige's return flight was a stark contrast to her initial journey. The seat next to her was occupied by an older woman who, though polite enough, didn't bother Paige once during the flight. Looking around, just in case, there was no trace of the familiar stranger. Instead, the cabin was filled with the mundane sounds of passengers settling in for a routine trip. She stared out the window, her thoughts drifting back to the mysterious man she'd allowed herself to daydream about every day since meeting him en route to London. Busy days faded into fast-paced weeks, but Paige found herself constantly thinking about Jacob. She would catch herself daydreaming about their conversation, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his work, and the way his hand felt in hers. She longed to see him again, to feel that connection that had been so powerful and so fleeting. One day, Paige's curiosity got the better of her.
She opened her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Let's see what I can find out about you, Jacob," she said softly, typing what details she had into the search bar. Armed with the first name and the name of his company, she was able to narrow her search down to about 50 people. It had been his picture on the company's website, however, that stopped her cold. She clicked on the link, and her heart skipped a beat as she read his bio. He wasn't just some executive, he was the CEO, a high-profile figure on pace to bringing his company closer to $1 billion valuation within the next year. The revelation unnerved her. She didn't want to be involved with someone so publicly known, who she could inevitably be linked back to. With that thought in mind, she decided not to pursue Jacob at all, despite her fond memories of their time together. A month later, fate intervened when Paige and Jacob bumped into each other at a coffee shop in Washington, D.C. Paige's heart skipped a beat as she entered the quaint but bustling cafe, her eyes instantly locking with Jacob's across the room. "Jacob," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "What are you doing here?" Jacob's face lit up with surprise and joy. "Paige, I can't believe it. What a coincidence to run into you here," he said, his voice filled with genuine happiness. Except Jacob didn't believe in coincidences. Up to that very moment, he had been consumed with thoughts of Paige. He found himself likening every woman he'd met since London to her, finding them lacking in comparison. He had yearned for her intelligence, vibrance, and the way she made him feel alive. Now his heart pounded heavily in his chest as she once again stood mere feet from him. Once their orders had been completed, he and Paige found an out-of-the-way high-top table to sit at. Looking across the table at Paige, his feelings were a tumultuous mix of joy, anger, and confusion. They were sipping caffeine and exchanging pleasantries, but he'd wanted to ask her why she'd never called. He thought they'd forged something special while across the pond, but he didn't want to say so and be found to be the only one harboring that sentiment. Besides, with the throngs of captivated and opportunistic women that ran in his circles, Jacob was usually the one doing the ghosting. Never before had he been in such a needy position over a woman, and he wasn't looking to introduce any new habits now. While Paige offered him polite platitudes, Jacob's eyes searched hers for something, anything that indicated she'd wanted to pick up from where they'd left off. Her expression, vacant of any such sentiment, had him resigning himself to sharing nothing more than a few civil niceties with her before taking his leave. "Well, it was nice to see you again, Paige, but I've got to run. I hope you have a great day," Jacob stated as they finished their micro-breakfast and both stood to leave. Paige's heart ached as she watched Jacob walk away, her mind racing with the words she wanted to say. She'd wanted to explain. She'd wanted to tell Jacob how she felt, how much she thought about him. But now that she knew who he really was, she couldn't. She couldn't risk her well-fought for peace and privacy for something that might not last. They'd both been in town for a cybersecurity forum, but due to the chilly shift they both noticed while conversing, neither ever got around to mentioning it. If they had, then perhaps their morning could have been started as a rekindling opportunity, instead of the awkward brush-off that had left them both baffled and perplexed. At the forum, their paths had once again inevitably crossed. Paige came up short when she saw him. Watching Jacob in part disbelief and with a profound curiosity, she observed as he silently scoured the registration table for his name badge. So unlike other nine-figure earners in their industry, he was an enigma that didn't travel with a large entourage or require green room and backstage access in such a public space. She was sure he employed the appropriate security detail, he'd be a fool not to, but for the most part, he seemed like an otherwise normal person at an IT conference, simply there to learn and grow. Finally finding the lanyard that identified him, he casually draped the credentials around his neck before stopping in his tracks. He immediately looked around the large hall until his eyes landed on Paige. Unsure of what impetus led to him searching her out, she just stood there like a doe in headlights until she watched him pick up another lanyard and move purposefully toward her. "You didn't mention that you'd be here," he said as he gently placed her name tag over her head and around her neck.
"Neither did you," Paige pointed out softly. Opening their registration packets to find that they'd selected the same sessions, the pair chuckled disbelievingly, already knowing they would be attending all of the events together. The all-day conference turned into an attendee meet and greet and cocktail hour, which naturally led to dinner later that evening. Secured at a private table in the dimly lit restaurant, Jacob and Paige fell easily into the rhythm they'd set on their initial meeting, their renewed connection undeniable. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and they laughed and joked as if no time had passed at all. "Jacob, I want to apologize," Paige said, her voice soft. "I should have reached out. I got scared." "Scared of me?" he asked incredulously. "It's complicated," she said. "Look, Paige, I know the way that we met was a bit unconventional, but please understand that I would never. It's not you. Well, not all you." Jacob sensed that she had something heavy to share, so he did not interrupt her. "I lost your card at the airport," she began. "I see," he nodded, although he was secretly unsure he believed her. "And you should know that I was very upset at not having any way of getting in touch with you. Then, the client proposal I thought was going to only take one afternoon ended up extending for a full week. At that point, I had already missed the conference and had resigned myself to the fact that perhaps fate truly was a cruel mistress," she expelled in one long outburst. When he seemed content to let her exercise her truth, Paige continued, "I thought of you often and eventually did an internet search on you. As you can imagine, learning that you aren't just some executive at Novasphere, but the full-fledged CEO was more than a little surprising," she pointed out. "So, you ghosted me because I omitted sharing my job title with you?" Jacob asked skeptically. "No, Jacob," she said softly. "Then why?" "Because no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about you," he admitted. "Because," she started and stopped. "Tell me," Jacob encouraged. "My last serious dating experience ended badly. We were in a very public relationship that soured, and my significant other at the time didn't take too kindly to being broken up with. He resorted to blowing up my life by, well, on social media and in our mutual friend groups. He posted images." She spoke so low that Jacob could barely hear her. "Non-consensual distribution of intimate images," she corrected. "I'd eventually gotten everything scrubbed from the World Wide Web, but not before acquaintances, friends, and several clients had borne witness to the fallout of bad choices and an even worse breakup. It was an expensive and arduous process, and by the time I'd gotten everything taken care of, the damage had already been done. I'd ultimately had to move away from a city I loved and essentially start my life over." "I'm so sorry that happened to you," Jacob offered sincerely and reached for her hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "So, you thought I would judge you if I knew?" he asked. "No, but after I found out who you were and the kind of power, prestige, and notoriety that comes with being who you are, I knew that the juxtaposition between the high-profile kind of life that you lead and the private kind of life that I require would be very different. I didn't want to risk being connected to you publicly." "PII," he recalled, now comprehending fully. "Yes. I'm disappointed that you believed you had to go to such lengths, but I understand why you did," Jacob replied, his eyes kind. "Thank you for telling me, Paige, and despite everything, thank you for making the decision to be here with me now." When her deep brown skin flushed an impossible shade of pink, Jacob reached across the table and squeezed her hand warmly. As the heaviness of the moment eventually dissolved, the couple pivoted into more important matters. Poking absently at the food on his plate, Jacob stopped and turned to Paige, amusement in his eyes. "Paige, I need to know, what's your last name? Where do you live? Can we see each other again?" Paige's heart pounded in her chest as she watched his playful gaze turn serious. "Richardson," she said softly. "Paige Richardson. I live in Philadelphia. And yes, although I shouldn't, I would actually love to see you again, Jacob." "McAdams. I live in San Diego. And why shouldn't you?" Jacob looked both pleased and puzzled by her answer.
Paige took a deep breath, her eyes searching his before responding. "Honestly, Jacob, I'm not looking for anything casual right now. I've been single on purpose and for a long time. I want something real, something meaningful, and I'm willing to wait until I find it." Not wanting to scare her away by proclaiming that maybe she already had, Jacob simply nodded, his expression serious. "I understand, Paige. I feel the same way. I'm not looking for anything casual either. I want something real, something that lasts." Even with the most obvious conundrum being that we live on two completely different coasts, she laughed. Jacob reached across the table, retaking her hand in his. "Paige, I know we live on opposite sides of the country, but I want to date you exclusively. I want to see where this goes, to see if we can make this work." Paige's heart fluttered as she looked at Jacob, her eyes misting. "But long-distance dating doesn't make sense, Jacob. It's too hard, too complicated. How can we make this work when we're so far apart?" Jacob's eyes burned with intensity as he looked at Paige. Our connection on that flight didn't make sense either. It was instant, unexpected, but it happened. And I believe that if we want this, if we're willing to fight for it, then we can make this work, no matter the distance. Weighing the words and the exchange between them, both Jacob and Paige leaned across the table as if pulled by a magnetic force. Their lips met in a passionate kiss, their hearts pounding with the intensity of their connection. "Paige, will you try?" Jacob asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Will you give us a chance?" Paige's heart ached with longing as she looked into his eyes. "Yes, Jacob, I will try. I will give us a chance." Months passed, and Paige and Jacob's relationship blossomed. They spent weekends together, exploring each other's cities, meeting each other's friends. Jacob often flew out to see Paige, or he would fly her out to his home, always making sure that as his partner, she felt protected, respected, and cherished. Their dates were a mix of simple pleasures and grand gestures. They went to movies, sporting events, and museums, but they also attended fundraising galas and high-profile events, their presence turning heads and sparking curiosity. Jacob's eyes met Paige's as they walked into the gala, their arms linked. "People are staring, aren't they?" she asked, her expression unsure, but her voice calm. "They are, but I don't care, Paige, and neither should you. I don't care what anyone thinks. I only care about you, about us." Hanging on to those words, she let Jacob escort her into the elegant and exclusive function. As their relationship continued to flourish, articles began popping up in the press, inquiring into the woman who had captured the heart of tech mogul Jacob McAdams. Being seen with Jacob on both coasts had done little to reduce the exposure she was so worried about, but thanks to the line of business he was in, curiosity and inferences were the best the media could do. Paige's privacy had thankfully never been breached. Jacob's heart swelled to near bursting with something he could only identify as love whenever they were together. She made him happy, and he hoped he was reciprocating in such a way that she'd one day soon completely let her guard down the way she had made it easy for him to. On a particularly special weekend trip that he'd arranged for her after their hectic schedules had made it nearly impossible to see each other for several weeks, Jacob outdid himself with her private travel, junior suite lodging, and dedicated spa treatments. Arriving at his palatial home feeling refreshed but famished, Paige's driver had dropped her off just in time for the 5-course candle-lit dinner prepared by a renowned private chef Jacob had hired for the evening. Halfway through the 4th course, Jacob took in Paige's beauty, his eyes shining with happiness at the contentment he witnessed. "Paige, I know it's only been a few months, but I'm convinced you're the woman I want to spend my life with." Fork halfway to her mouth, she stopped and stared back across the table at the man who had done nothing but make her happy, but who had also just raised the stakes. "What?" she said softly as she slowly lowered the fork to her plate. "To you, this may seem sudden, but to me, this feels right. I want you to always feel loved and cherished, and I want you to know that I'm sure about us.
I know it hasn't been very long, but I'm a strategic thinker and a stellar closer, and I know a sure thing when I see it. Paige, will you marry me? Paige's heart hammered in her chest as she looked at Jacob, her mind racing. Jacob, I'm not sure I'm ready. Why not? Jacob asked, undeterred. You've protected me like you promised you would, but this? We'd be splashed across the headlines. We'd never have another private moment ever again, and I'm quite sure that all anyone will want to know is if I'm with you for your money, Paige explained practically. Well, are you? He asked, and she smirked and rolled her eyes to keep from laughing. You know I don't like being media fodder, Jacob, and I don't want our relationship to be about that. I want it to be about us, about our commitment to each other. Jacob's eyes searched Paige's, his voice soft. Paige, I need to know. Do you feel anything for me? Do you love me? Paige's eyes watered as she looked at Jacob. Yes, Jacob, I do. I love you. Jacob's heart swelled with joy as he looked at Paige, his determination renewed. I love you too, Paige. I love you with all my heart. I need you to say yes. I need you to marry me. And if you want privacy, we can wed secretly in Vegas. I just need you, Paige. I need you to be my wife. This time she did laugh, hard. But as her laughter eventually died on her lips and she looked into Jacob's eyes, she saw the seriousness in his gaze. Oh my gosh, you're serious? You really want to marry me, secretly, in Las Vegas? Vegas, Paris, the moon, wherever you'll have me, he confirmed. Paige's eyes widened as she looked at him. Jacob, what about your company? What about the money, the public scrutiny, the media? I don't want to be involved in any of that. Jacob's eyes softened as he looked at her. Paige, what about it? I have money, yes. I'm in the public eye, yes. But none of that matters if I don't have you. I've had all those things for a long time and was only half the man I am than when I'm with you. Can't you see that it's you, your love, that makes my life better? But it would be so messy and impersonal. None of it would be a secret because we would need lawyers and prenuptial agreements. Our union would be so transactional, she pointed out. Jacob's eyes burned with intensity as he looked at Paige. Paige, you already own my heart. What is a couple $100 million compared to that? You're crazy, Jacob, she half sobbed, half laughed. Jacob's eyes twinkled with amusement as he looked at Paige. Yes, I am, Paige. I'm crazy about you. Hesitating for a short beat, Paige rushed eagerly into his open arms, her face wet with tears, but her love for him unmistakable. Paige Richardson, will you marry me? Will you be my wife? He asked again. Before she could respond, his lips met hers in a passionate kiss, his heart throbbing with resolve. You don't play fair, Jacob. I can't think with your lips all over me, she tried unsuccessfully to pull away from his plundering mouth. Yeah, I know. Their wedding in Vegas had been simple, beautiful, and just for them. They exchanged vows, their hearts bursting with love and excitement. Their honeymoon in Carmel, by the sea, was an abbreviated but beautiful weekend getaway filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a future together. In the still of the luxurious suite, they lay entwined, their bodies slick with sweat and their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Jacob pulled Paige into his arms, holding her close as they drifted off to sleep, satisfied and sated. The next morning, they woke to the sound of rain pattering against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Paige stirred in Jacob's arms, a contented smile on her face. Jacob pulled her closer, his lips pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead.
"Good morning, Mrs. McAdams," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning, Mr. McAdams," Paige replied, her voice soft and dreamy. They lay there for a while, simply enjoying each other's company, their bodies pressed close. Eventually, they rose, dressing in comfortable terry cloth robes and making their way to the kitchenette to start a pot of coffee. Settling back into the bedroom suite to sip their coffee and watch the rain, Paige turned to Jacob, her eyes serious. "I love you, Jacob," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I never expected this, but I can't deny how I feel." Jacob reached out to Paige, taking her hand in his. "I feel the same way," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I never believed in love at first sight, but with you, I knew immediately." Paige smiled, her heart swelling with happiness. "So, what do we do now?" Jacob leaned into her, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Jacob," she warned, her own eyes hooded. "Whatever we want, wife. The world is our information superhighway." "You mean oyster," she giggled. "Potato, proxy protocol," he shrugged. Their love story, which began on a transatlantic flight, had defied all odds. They had found each other, lost each other, and found each other again. And now they were ready to face the world together, coding the life they wanted to live on their terms.